Hey everybody, this is Dream, and I have a nice little 8-game slate for college basketball here. This slate does start at 6:30. Getting this video out a little bit later than I like, but I just had to do a lot of research on some of these teams. And all these games are relatively tight. There's one game that's over 137 points projected, which is the Marquette St. John game, which is 157 points. So you definitely want to try to work a couple of guys from that game in on this particular slate. But all the games actually have viable options, with it being a really solid slate in general. There's not too many blowout situations here. Every game looks like it's going to be a pretty good game. So Tennessee and Mississippi State might be the most differential of all the games on this particular slate. So let's go and get into the teams I do like. I have Marquette over St. John, Tennessee over Mississippi State, Vanderbilt over South Carolina, Michigan State over Nebraska, Syracuse over Louisville, Notre Dame over Boston College, UK over LSU, and Creighton over Seton Hall. So that's what I have there, and I have two guys in my options here for must plays, or core plays rather. Jaden Akins for Michigan State. He is starting now, and he's been playing pretty solid all season long. He's had 3 straight over 20 fantasy points, and I expect that to continue here. His price is just entirely too cheap. He is averaging 0.86 fantasy points per minute, which is good for a guard. I do like him a lot here. I also like AJ Hoggard for Michigan State. He's been only one game under 21 fantasy points all season long, and he's had 4 of the last 5 over 30. He's in a really good spot here. He's averaging 1 fantasy point per minute on the season, and that's a very nice spot to be for a guard. He's also a good scorer as well. Then we'll look at Tyler Hoker, or Kolick, sorry, Hoker. Where does that come from Marquette here against St. John's. He's had no games under 20 fantasy points all season long, but he mostly scores in the mid to upper 20s. Wish he was a little bit under this price point, but he's still viable for the consistency. He doesn't really score a lot of actual points. He's more of an assist guy and rebounds and some steals. So he is viable, but he is a little bit risky as a result of that situation. Just the fact he doesn't a big time scorer. Then we'll look at L. Ellis for Louisville. He's been playing pretty well lately for Louisville. He's one of the few players on their team that seems to have a lot of talent and upside. He's been playing well. He's had some really rough games, but overall he's got some potential in this matchup. He had a pretty good game against Kentucky last game to build upon from a fantasy perspective. Then we're going to look at some value plays here. Cam Hayes for LSU looks pretty interesting today. He's been inconsistent throughout the season, but he started the last 4 games, and 3 of the last 4 he's been over 16 fantasy points, including a couple big 30-point games. I expect him to have a good opportunity in this matchup to play well, and hopefully he can pay off for us here at a pretty low price. And then Montrez Mathis for St. John's. He's at only $4,100, and he's playing and starting 28 minutes per game for the most of the part. He's a scoring dependent guard, but he's been paying off. He's had a couple sub-10 fantasy point games on the season, but he has some nice upside for the situation, and his price just makes him viable overall on the slate, and a good way to pay up for some guys at the forward and utility position. Then we're going to look at Joey Hauser as our first forward to look at. For Michigan State, he's averaging 0.88 fantasy points per minute. He's only had 2 games all season under 23 fantasy points, and he's had 4 straight over 29. Definitely a viable option today. Then for St. John's, I have 2 options here. David Jones for St. John's. Now, he didn't start the last game, so keep that in mind. But he's only had 2 games all year under 26 fantasy points, and 4 of the last 5 have been over 29. From the starters and stuff like that. And then Joel Soriano, he is going to be starting for certain. He is $9,300, but he's 5 of the last 6 games over 40 fantasy points. He's been a double-double machine lately, and I expect that to continue here. Not quite as much upside as Oscar Tshiebwe, but he still has a viable upside on this particular slate. Then we'll look at Derek Walker for Nebraska. Now, he's in an interesting spot. He's only had one game under 20 fantasy points all season long. He did miss the first 5 games of the season, but he's played well, playing 25 minutes per game and having pretty good upside on this particular matchup. Then we're going to look at sorry for messing your name up, Igudaro for Marquette. Oso Igudaro, I guess that's a good way. For Marquette, he's at $7,600. He's been playing really well at a .97 fantasy point per minute. He's only had 2 games under 22 fantasy points all season long, and he's had 2 over 40 in the last 5. So he has some nice upside here. I do think he's a great option on the slate. And then we're going to look at Oscar Tshiebwe for Kentucky, who is probably the safest, most dominant player available on the slate. He's had some big time games. Obviously, he's stupid expensive at $10,400 for a college basketball player, but he has 20 rebound upside as well as points upside. He's been playing pretty well lately in the rebound department. And this is a game where it should be relatively tight, so he'll play a full complement of minutes and get a lot of opportunity. And the Kentucky is going to try to get the ball to him more and more as the season goes on, and that is very important for their success. And he should pay off very nicely. He is scoring a ridiculous 1.3 fantasy points per minute. He's just a rebounding machine, Dennis Rodman-like type player. And then finally, last but not least, G.G. Jackson for South Carolina. Now, he is a little bit risky due to the matchup today being a little bit on the tail end, one of the lower scoring teams on this entire slate. But he has played really well all season long. He has no games under 23 fantasy points throughout the season. He has a whole lot of games over 30 fantasy points, but the matchup is a little bit less ideal here. So he is a little bit risky due to the matchup, but overall, he's a great play. In general, he has rebound potential and scoring potential in this one. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.